All right, looks like we're live. So it's been a while since I put up a video, and I've had the opportunity to do something that I think is pretty cool and is going to be really valuable to you guys. It's not necessarily about holsters. It's a lot more about concealment. I have someone here who I've met relatively recently who has a lot to offer all of you. His name is Varg Freeborn, and he runs a company called One Life Defense. I had the opportunity to take his class, Violence of Mind, back in September. Down at F3 Tactical in Virginia, and it really seriously reoriented me and solidified a lot of things that I had been thinking about and reorganized a lot of my thoughts about concealment and concealed carry and how much deeper it is than I think we really give it credit for. And I wanted to bring him on here to talk to you guys on this channel about the topics of concealment and why it really matters. So take it away, Varg, and tell these kind of people about yourself.
So I am primarily running my training company out of Northeast Ohio, and I teach firearms, gunfighting on the range. I also deal with conditioning and fitness, and obviously most well known probably for the mindset work. My background is probably the only one you will run across in the industry that is like mine. I come from, as you know, a deep experience in the violent criminal underworld. I was brought up in that. I grew up in that, and then I had a self-defense case that went wrong, which can happen to anybody, much easier than you think. It went wrong, landed in prison for 5 years. Did well there, came back out, fought the case afterwards, post release, and was eventually restored all of my rights, so I can own guns and buy guns and do whatever. But I nonetheless, experienced that whole ordeal. I've been in several knife confrontations. The self-defense case, as many people know, was a stabbing. So I stabbed the guy 23 times. And then I've been stabbed a couple times before and after that, and been involved in a few more weapons-oriented fights. And all of that experience comes from not from training and not from theory, but from actually being there and doing it where it matters. And this is going to be a perspective that is coming from the people that it comes from the place that produces the people that you're trying to protect yourself against, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So what do you want to talk about first there?
So I think when people talk about concealment and concealed carry, they don't unpack that substantially. They don't unpack what constitutes concealed, what it is exactly that you're concealing, and why it's of enormous benefit to maintain concealment across all those different facets of the topic. Like what kind of advantage does concealment give you? And what are the things that you want to be concealing? Mm-hmm. Like people take it superficially to mean not printing. And that I've always considered that to be insufficient, like an insufficient minimum. And especially after the Violence of Mind class, that really crystallized a lot of things for me. And now I'm much more assertive about how insufficient merely not printing or covering your gun is in terms of concealment, and how much more comprehensive it is as a concept. And I was wondering if you would want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So when I teach concealment, which 80% of what I teach is concealed pistol work, because that's what we do. We're civilians, and we just work with concealed pistol most of the time. So when I teach concealment, any type of a concealment class, I push this concept that concealment is about concealing capabilities and intentions as much as concealing tools. And people don't understand what this means until we dig deeper and get into ambush, counter ambush, and kind of how much that plays into criminal violence. So when you start to understand that a good majority of the confrontations with a seriously violent criminal is going to be ambush style, and when you want to have the edge in a counter ambush situation, your counter ambush becomes an ambush in itself if you've effectively concealed capabilities and intentions and tools, because they have grossly underestimated the amount of force they need to come at you with, because you're sandbagging on the surface. So this is a criminal technique that is extremely well known in the criminal world, right? This is what's done all the time. There's two levels of concealment. The argument against concealment is deterrence. That's always the one that you hear. You know, an open carry because I can deter bad guys. It doesn't deter anybody. It might deter the average shithead that you could have defeated anyway. But the guy who's really dedicated, the guy who's really the one that's going to change your life, is not going to be deterred by that. He's actually has gained the capability to use a very accurate measure of how much force he's going to need and what techniques and tactics he's going to need to take you down, because you've laid all your cards on the fucking table.
Yeah, that's the main issue, because we're coming to this from two very opposite ends of the spectrum. The person who is capable of the person who's going to see you open carrying and decide that that's an opportunity and not a deterrence has a lot more experience with attacking dangerous people than you have with being attacked by dangerous people. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about this the other day. You put me on to Prison Talk with Kirk, and I've been watching that pretty religiously. I'll let it play in the background. And an interesting thing that I picked up on is the number of dudes inside who are going to work out with their sweatshirt still on. Right? Yeah. They don't come out in the yard and do push-ups and dips and take their shirt off. They, in terms of capability and tools, they maintain that level of concealment constantly. So the people around them who are looking at them and sizing them up constantly, right? Because the environment is a pressure cooker of sizing other people up.
Yes.
Right? And they're staying covered up even in an opportunity where even in a circumstance where they have the opportunity to demonstrate prowess to other people, right? They could be out there showing off how stacked they are after doing however many fucking push-ups, but they're still covered up. So if that dude runs into you out on the street and you're, you know, just a hot mess of adult muffin top and open carry, you're just a free gun. Mm-hmm. You know, like, I think the depth and the degree of experience which the adversary has with concealment might be something that we kind of take for granted or don't even really think about.
Yeah. So let's rewind back to that point about attacking dangerous people. This is something that's never talked about. When the experts come out, right? The people who have interviewed criminals talk about what criminals tell them they will do. Selection is always based on what? The least dangerous person. It's utter bullshit in the fucking real criminal world. Now, I survived and thrived in this world, so this is firsthand. I'm not telling you that I talked to 200 criminals and this is what they told me. I was a convicted felon who lived in the prison atmosphere. I was sent into the penitentiary as a 130-pound teenage white kid, and I came out of there 195-pound dude, right? The things that I learned there, and also growing up in my uncles, and you know, I grew up in a drug house. I was raised by a family that had, many of them had been to prison. Prison culture and criminal combat culture was a part of my life before prison. That's why when I got there, it wasn't, I didn't have that big of a risk, because, you know, first of all, I got there by stabbing somebody 23 times. What the fuck do you think I'm going to do if you cage up on me in there? You know what I mean? Like, it's established right off the bat. So that attacking dangerous people thing is something that no one is talking about, but it's absolutely out there. And if you think about the prison atmosphere, you're in an atmosphere where probably 70% of the population is fucking dangerous at some level, like seriously dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And if deterrence really worked, there would be no prison violence, right? Like, if, because trust me, like, there are dudes in there that are jacked to fuck beyond whatever you would ever believe. Like, it would make you sweat to sit next to these dudes in public, you know? And they will get stabbed in the fucking neck.
Yeah.
Like, if they cross the wrong line, and if you know, nobody is susceptible, or nobody is not susceptible to it. Like, everybody knows boundaries. You have boundaries. The bigger and stronger guys can get away with more, but you still have boundaries, because a motherfucker will, if he'll burn his own house down to burn you up with it. And what I mean is, you know, he'll jump on you in your sleep and stab you to death and catch another case, you know? But just to prove a point that doesn't matter how big and fucking bad you are, like, there are dudes out there that will take you down and break you down, and it doesn't matter, because it's all about being able to judge the amount of force needed to take the person down. So there are people who attack dangerous people, and it happens all the time. When you talk about, I just want to cover the concealment part. When you talk about the guys who wear the sweatshirts and cover up how muscular they are, how jacked they are, that is a very real thing. There's a reason behind that. And one of the reasons, the main reason is that the person who is used to attacking dangerous people, the biggest deterrence for that person is uncertainty.
Yeah.
If you can create uncertainty, because you're not predictable, you don't project any certain thing, you're sandbagging, obviously, right? And if you want to be judged at all, you want them to err on the side of coming in too soft.
Right.
But, you know, that whole thing about being able to obscure your capabilities and not project what you're all about creates uncertainty in that high level attacker, and allows them to take time to think about what they're looking at without actually being able to come to a conclusion, right? And that uncertainty is on your side.
For sure.
So
I was having a conversation with someone else who I'm friends with, who has a background in doing criminal things, and something that they were discussing with me was that in the event that they were engaged in, you know, like robbery or assault, if you went out and you robbed people who were lesser than you in terms of like threat or danger, like if you go out and you rob some little old lady, none of your peers are really going to respect that. They're going to look down at you for that, and you might not have the same status that you previously did. But if you go out and you rob or attack someone who is visibly dangerous, that gets you further in terms of your peer group. You know, like, you know, if you go out together and you decide that you're going to do some robberies, and you pick someone who's obviously a bit more of a challenge, not only, even if you're not necessarily getting as much financially from that, you're getting not only a different kind of status with the people you're around, but you're also getting a different kind of thrill from it, and
an experience level.
Yeah, and yeah, that's the other thing too. I mean, you're
becoming a better fighter.
Yeah,
through experience.
So I was also thinking about how the way we treat concealment is also a little superficial in terms of we talk a lot about on-body and off-body carry, and we might even talk about being gray to a certain degree, which I think is like totally. I saw for real, right hand to God, someone had a T-shirt that said "Gray Man" on it, and I'm just like, I was like 2 seconds. I was just thinking to myself, like, I just want to follow you to your car, and
yeah.
I don't think that's obviously like ridiculous and laughable. But as soon as I encounter that little snippet of information about like some dude in an Arizona prison who's out on the yard working out with his sweatshirt on so no one can tell what he's about, I started thinking about how many little things am I doing that are like how many tells do I have? How do I look in my environment? Like it's just down to there's so many little facets to it that I've started observing it a lot more carefully, and then I start thinking about all the other strategies, right? Like how do you conceal your intentions? How do you because there's all sorts of stuff. Like we're dealing with an adversary who, we're concerned about concealing a gun on our person, and we're dealing with people who have such a comprehensive
experience.
Yeah, and view of concealment that they're so into concealing things that they don't conceal things on themselves anymore, right? Like I could be in an environment where I have immediate access to a number of weapons, none of which are on my person, or I'm used to hanging out,
which is common in prison,
right? Because we're dealing with people who are practicing concealment in an environment where they're routinely searched, right? Yeah. Like, nope, I haven't been searched. I get searched when I go through an airport.
Yeah,
that's it. And that's a predictable thing. No one's coming into my environment going, "You stand up, I'm going to search you," right? Yeah. And even on the outside, folks are concealing the way they do business. Like, for example, in like a drug environment, right? You're not holding the drugs. Someone else is holding them. They're concealed in some other place. You might have access to a weapon, which is concealed in your environment, right? All these little things, like, I wasn't figuring out how to conceal things when I was 12, like it's so much deeper than the game that we're playing, I think. And that kind of gives me a lot of anxiety,
Yeah, so a big, and as you know, you've been to my Violence of Mind class, a big part of what I teach is that most of you in the audience, in any classroom, any gun class, most people who are concealed carry, they first heard the word concealment and thought about it with any focus at all when they either took their concealed carry class or was getting ready to. Like you didn't think about that. But what I want to go back and point out is when you talked about being in an environment that you're used to getting searched and still getting away with it, I wish I could describe in great detail what the shakedowns in prison are like. It's unfucking believable. Like they have had, a century of dedicated progressive effort at getting good at searching people and premises. Like they have 100 years of history of that, at least, of dedicated progressive effort where they've been sharing and pushing knowledge forward as guards and institutions to get as good as they can about sweeping an entire place. And they will go through and sweep every inch of everything up in the ceiling, any holes, and pull vents down, open up anything that even takes a couple screws to open it. They'll unscrew it, they'll open it. Like, they are so fucking thorough, and they will still get 115 knives that year. Like, they will still get all of this stuff, that people will still get stabbed, people will still get drugs. Like, it's an art form. Concealment is an art form, and it has nothing to do with just concealing something just on your body. To them, that is like, so it's a level of craft that's at the same level of really highly evolved special operations or undercover work. And if there was an equivalent in the criminal world, it would be the convict who has participated in that kind of activity in a prison environment and had grown up doing that. As a child, they're hiding their intentions in their tools, and they're smuggling drugs, and they're, whether they're being raised by their grandparents or their uncles or, whoever it is that's the authority figures, if they have any at all. They definitely face them when they go to school, and they're, smuggling stuff in and out of school. Like, they've been doing this shit their entire lives. So when it comes time to conceal a weapon and conceal the intentions, it's not about when I put the gun on. It's different when you have a legal right and a privilege, and you have a license or a card that says you can carry the gun. You put it on and you're like, I'm the good guy, and you walk around and you're like, I'm the good guy, right? Whereas they put their shit on and they're like, I'm the fucking bad guy and I can't get caught. Like, their whole mindset is different. You let that sink in for a minute. Like, their whole mindset starts around concealment at a very deep level, whereas yours is like, I'm the good guy, I'm allowed to have this thing. So concealment is kind of important, but it's not. You see the difference?
Yeah, for sure. And so Philadelphia is one of possibly only the big East Coast city. I mean, aside from especially in the Northeast, I think, if you expand your definition of East Coast and start moving pretty further south, you can sort of get into some other cities. But if you're talking like, New York, DC, Baltimore, Boston, like, Philadelphia is the only place really where I think your concealed carry permit's any good. And that's kind of an exception. And so in my business, I deal with people who carry all over the country, and like, the standard for what constitutes concealed changes. But for me, in this city, even with the permit, I've always felt like the permit, like, there's something fake about the permit. Like, I'm still not supposed to have a gun around here. Like, I'm like, this isn't the environment in which I'm supposed to have a gun. And that if I'm seen with a gun, it's going to be a problem. If somebody spots me having a gun, it's going to be a problem. If a cop knows that I have a gun, they're going to ask me about it. And if someone who's looking for it and is a criminal can tell that I have a gun, I'm going to get tested on it too. So I've never felt like I can just throw in a gun and it doesn't matter how much I print and I don't really care. Like, I still am very concerned about A, how obvious it is that I'm carrying something, and B, whether or not, like, I appear to be the kind of person who, like, whether or not any other variables contribute to the perception of me having a gun. And I've always been kind of like, I never just throw in a gun and like don't care about it. I'm always conscious of it. And I've spoken to people who say, well, that's going to go away or whatever. But even I build my own holsters to make the gun invisible, and I'm still self-conscious about it, and I'm still wary about how much it doesn't feel like I'm allowed to have it. still, even though I'm a licensed good guy and I don't have any problems, I'm still aware that there are a number of consequences looming over me that surround the gun, not just the legal ones of self-defense, but sort of like all the mess that can come with it, and how I might have a permit, but I'm going to have to prove that I'm allowed to have this gun at any given moment. And it's better to just not be spotted. So that's always been something that's been on my mind, but I see other people and they're from like a rural environment and they throw their shirt over it. And I'm like, I can tell what brand of gun you have under your shirt. Like how much, like, how does concealment not matter to you? But I think even in that environment, right, where if in an environment where everyone has a gun and nobody really cares and it's rural and everybody knows you, the degree to which you should keep it concealed, I think still matters for the counter ambush aspect of it. You know, like at no point does it really become casual or inconsequential, I guess.
No, because I mean, it didn't happen. We wish it would have, but in that very, very small town of 400 people population size, 400 people, and 26 people got murdered in that church, in that town. If you were, you know, properly concealed and in a position to not be the first one shot, even then counter ambush matters. Like that's like an extreme case, but it could, like Chappie always says that gunfights are won by millimeters and milliseconds, right? That little bit of concealment might be that millisecond of time you needed, you know, to get that shot off. Like there's more to it than just hiding the gun. You've seen like some of the best guys that I think do this type of work, or you watch the South American cops, especially cops like Brazil, where cops are getting murdered by like hundreds a year, right?
Right, like 3 dudes on a scooter show up and shoot
and
up a cop
assassinate dudes.
Yeah,
like it's a thing, right? It's a thing that you live with if you're a cop down there. So these dudes are super tuned up on concealment and reaction. And one of the things that I teach in my classes, in my fighting classes, is that concealment continues throughout the fight. Concealment doesn't stop. Everybody thinks concealment's only gets you to the fight, and then the fight's on, and then you throw all your cards out on the table, and the best guy wins. That's not how it's done. If you want to really be good at it, you conceal all the way through the fight. If I'm fighting hands-on, if it goes hands-on, and let's say he's got a blade, right? If I'm working to control that blade, keep it out of my organs, I have to work on that problem first while trying to maybe simultaneously create space to draw my gun. While I'm practicing that activity, I do not want to cue him into the fact that I'm going for a gun, because then I have another problem, right?
Right. Now he escalates the amount of effort he's putting into the knife attack, and you have to react to that on top.
And also focuses on, you know, so now he's got a knife in one hand and he's trying to go for the gun in the other hand. Like you've fucked yourself, right? So concealment continues throughout the fight at different levels at different times for different reasons. There were times when I fought dudes that were, you know, stronger or faster than me. And I've been in a couple hundred fights, right? So and I've been in probably close to a dozen lethal force level fights. So when after a certain while, you start to get real analytical during the process, and you start to really be able to think things through as it's happening. And whereas like there's a knife, and you know, when I got sliced all the way down both arms, and you know, there was a massive amount of blood, but I was still able to think. Most people, you know, your first couple times through, that's the end of thinking. When you see that much blood, you're fucking done. But at that level, I'm thinking, you know, okay, so I have to portray something to bring them into a space where I can gain an advantage, right? So whatever that thing may be, do I portray a weakness in a particular area to bait them into a position, whatever it is. This people who practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu do this all the time. They conceal their motives and their intentions until they can shift their weight and catch the opportunity, or they'll bait someone into the opportunity and try not to let them know. So even in jiu-jitsu, they're practicing concealment of intentions and capabilities the entire time the fight is happening. And this is how a fight is like a chess game. It's you're positioning but if you ask people fundamental truths about things, they don't understand really what it is they're doing. And what I mean by that is if I say, what is the goal in a fight? People are like, to win, but that's not, fucking doesn't tell me what, how do you win? So the goal is basically to constantly improve your position while preferably worsening theirs. That's the entire thing is all based on that. You're improving your position and worsening your opponent's position. And concealment really is something that if you use it properly, there's no greater tool throughout that whole process. And the more you have other things to fall back on, like your capabilities in hand-to-hand fighting or your conditioning level, I'm really big on conditioning. The more that you can keep back and have cards under the table that you don't have to pull yet, you can keep your aces held back and just work for positioning so that when you do strike, you strike hard and it's decisive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and a lot of folks watching this are going to be familiar with the sort of like the little saying about, speed, surprise, and violence of action. And the most, surprise is really important because you can be as fast and as violent as you want, but if I can see it all ahead of time, then it doesn't matter how fast you are if I'm predicting it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you'd have to be incredibly fast to get through the window of prediction or to overcome the prediction lapse if I'm able to read it and react ahead of time. So I think surprise is really important. But there's a lot of depth to that too. I've been, I should have started this 10 years ago, but I've been going to the gym and doing a lot of weightlifting. And the more that I do that and the more gains that I see, the more I obscure them, right? Because I'm used to looking a certain way and being perceived a certain way. And I'm realizing how advantageous that is if that perception isn't truthful.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to be a lot more savvy about that and position myself to be more continually underestimated.
Yes.
Because that I think is an important advantage. So let's ask some specific questions just for clarity. And to sort of bring this back a little bit more directly relevant to some of the viewers. My standard for concealment of a tool is invisible to someone who's looking for it. What do you think?
That is a good standard. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
To someone who's looking for it. Not most people have a standard that the average person's not going to notice it, right? Or if you don't know it's there, you're not going to look for it, that kind of stuff. But gun people can spot other gun people all the time.
Immediately.
And you want to beat that guy.
Right. And I don't care if average people can see it or can't see it. Like they're
not a factor.
Right. As outside of, the politeness issue and outside the, convenience factor of not having some hypervigilant soccer mom call the security guard over. Right. That's inconvenient. But that's not the threshold here. The threshold is can someone who's used to checking other people for guns tell that I have one?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think if we're going to be clear, sometimes it's hard to make something totally invisible, but you want to at least ensure that the person who's looking for it is going to stare at you long enough that you can catch them looking at you. You know, like,
Yeah.
because that becomes obvious. You can tell who's looking at you. You know, we're designed to do that. That's why our eyes are the way they are. You know, you can catch somebody's gaze from a very long way away based on the sort of light dark contrast
Mm-hmm.
you pick up in their eyes, and you can sort of feel that they're looking at you. Like, this social animal is designed to tell when people are looking at it. And I think that either A, the advantage is in being invisible enough that no one's checking you out, and B, if they are, they have to do it for a prolonged amount of time such that they become obvious to you in whatever ways you can detect that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that based on the environment that they come from and the norms of that environment, they're uncomfortable staring at you for a long period of time as well.
Yes.
There's some truth to that? Like, you don't want to
Yes.
be caught staring at someone too long.
Yeah, because
And you've got a little internal timer for how appropriate that is.
Yeah, because that is a break in concealment as well. If you're in the predator or hunting mode, right? Part of that is you have to conceal the fact that you're doing that. And it's a, and guys, you can tell guys can't even do it with women, right? Like, guys will not even have couth about checking women out in public and not letting them see them check them out, like,
right,
to the point to where it's rude. And
right. And also, I think there's some dynamic there left over of some guys know exactly how long they're checking out a woman, and they do it that long in order to get noticed.
But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the guys that just don't, that aren't paying attention to the craft of it, right?
Right.
And so I have this really big thing about, if you want to have discipline and self-control, you have to practice those outside of the mat and outside of the range. And a lot of people do not. They do not carry over into all of their activities all day long. It needs to be a daily mindfulness practice, right? There's the opposite of the no mind concept is I was just reading about this today, the lingering mind concept, right? And this was the Zanshin from the Bushido, from that philosophy. And basically it's instead of no mind, there's a constant mindfulness, right? A constant self-awareness. And self-awareness is the absolute key to being successful at concealment, because you are self-scrutinizing everything, right, about yourself. And if you cannot do that honestly, then you have no chance of getting it past someone like me or someone else who's very, very experienced and knows how to hunt and spot people. If you cannot honestly scrutinize yourself and maintain self-control at all times, right? So how people treat people in relationships in public, how they treat the opposite sex, how they do business with people, all of these things, these characteristics need to be practiced during those times, as well as, when you're putting on a weapon or when you're actually doing combat. Because if you don't practice self-awareness all the time, you're not good at it. And that's just all there is to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, the follow-up question to that is, in regards to the kind of comprehensive total concealment that we're talking about here, what things do you want to be aware of in terms of self-awareness?
So it comes down to a couple of things. When you're practicing concealment, your job, what you're trying to actually do is manage the perception of other people. Concealment is perception management. Okay. And if you do not look at it like that, then you do not understand concealment at this level, right? Concealment is perception management. Perception, you're managing people's perceptions of you. And what's the best way to manage a perception of someone that they have of you? Is to avoid their perceptiveness altogether. So it's just like there's a sweet spot. Just let me make this point real quick. There's a sweet spot. If you ever notice, there's a guy like you're in a bar. There'll be a guy in the room who is so quiet that you're fucking watching him all the time, right? Like,
right.
Just, you know what I mean? And then there's the guys that are so loud that you just wish they'd shut up so you could stop watching them. And then there's a dude that's kind of in between somewhere, and you'll look over and he's there, and then you'll look over 20 minutes later and you're like, where's that dude? Oh, he's over there. That's the fucking guy that slips your consciousness, right? He's at that sweet spot to where your perception of him slips in and out because you've not been alerted to anything yet. When you do look back, he's somewhere else, right? And that's kind of the goal, right? Is to be the person who can ghost out of your consciousness and you don't even see it. I used to do this exercise. It's been a while since I've done it because it's really hard to set up, but I would take people into a parking lot with two cars, and we used to do this for a particular security thing that we were doing. So I would put somebody in a car, park them, and then I would say, I'm going to come in and watch you in the parking lot in multiple different spots. And so, I would come in and park and sit there and then say, okay, I'm at your 6 o'clock, right? And they see me. And then I would be able to, most people in the course of 45 minutes, move the car at least 3 times and they didn't see me move the car. You know what I mean? Even when they know you're there and they know that's what you're going to be doing. So if you can pull that off on the average person, because they just don't have that attention span, right? To just focus on one thing that long. Once you learn about people's lapse in their consciousness and you learn how to hit that sweet spot, your level of concealment goes up exponentially, because now that's the self-awareness part of it, right? That's what you want to manage, the perception. That's number one for concealment. Right.
When you were talking about it, I was thinking about how, right. So trying to be invisible is kind of a little open-ended, and I think what makes people the most invisible is when you meet someone's expectations of normalcy to the point where you are dismissible.
Dismissible is better than invisible.
Right. Like people move through the world and set things up as goals or obstacles. Yeah. Right. If you're in traffic, you have a goal, and everybody in another car is an obstacle, which is why we get road rage, right? And our environment is full of things which are constantly changing between goals and obstacles. The table could be in your way as you move through the room, but there are sometimes where it's a destination, it's where you want to be, right? Yeah. And we look at the people around us like that too. And I think we might have had a conversation a while ago about things like temperature, like volume temperature in a room.
Yeah.
And how the sound level and the voices and the tone of the voices and the speed of the voice creates whatever the normal environment is in that room, like a crowd of people. And you're going to hear the loudest person, right? And if it's a loud room, you're going to notice who's not talking. And so you want to be in the sort of middle range of that volume where no one's really paying attention, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're in an environment, you want to look as expected as you can.
Yeah.
Right. To the point where it's just not remarkable. Right. There's nothing that looks out of the ordinary, to the point where you just don't need to be observed anymore. You know, you get checked off the list and someone moves past.
So that's your signal level, right? Like, so when I teach situational awareness, I talk about wideband situational awareness, right? And that's where people get really tuned into being focused. And the more focused you are, the less you're actually able to perceive in your environment. And so when you sit facing a door and and the door's there and this happens and you look and the door is open and somebody's coming in and you're checking them out, like that level of focus is really too intense for that environment, and you're not hearing and seeing as many things as you possibly could. It's kind of like walking into something and looking through a paper tube.
Right.
You see just this, and that's all you see. So,
well, a single variable doesn't mean anything without any other relative metric to compare it to. So if you're only looking at one thing, you could be observing everything about it, but it's totally meaningless because you're just removing any context from it.
That's true. And also, even if you do understand its context to the rest of you're letting go of the rest of the environment to focus on that one thing anyway. So I teach, to take a noise print of kind of what is the normal noise level, what is the signal level of the environment that I'm in. If beeping horns and talking people and things like that are all part of what's going on around me, then all of that is going to be in that like normal signal level, right? And one of the biggest things that I teach when I talk about anything about us and our capabilities is that there's a mirror of the criminal in all of this. He has the same problems. He has the same capabilities. That's why I'm real big about, don't think the sheepdog thing. You're not a different species. We're the same species as our opponent. We're the same makeup, the same tools, same capabilities, the same everything, right? We have the same menu. So when we figure something out, we have to think they've figured that out too, that at least the higher level guys have figured that out. So in my experience, if I come into, let's say you're walking into the lunch area of prison and it's lunchtime and you've got 2,000 guys that are flowing through a chow hall, and there's going to be a hit that day. Somebody's going to get stabbed, right? Do you think that the person that's going to do the hit hasn't thought about blending into that signal level that's happening right then, right? Like they understand that signal level also, and people do not. They really don't seem to understand this about the criminal. Like the really dangerous guy understands that signal level. He understands that your lapses in your environmental awareness. He understands your lapses in your consciousness. He understands, how to drop off a radar. He understands that, certain patterns of behavior is perceptible. All of these things are as known in that world as they are in this world. They're more known in that world, actually.
Right. They've been doing it longer and are better at it.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's been sticking with me and has been informing a lot of the way I kind of reorganize my thoughts on this. That I think we spend a lot of time. So we see a lot of like good guy with a gun stuff, and a lot of that is like, or like body cam and dash cam videos from law enforcement, and what we see is most of the time someone going up against someone that you would not describe as higher order, like real riffraff. Like I think I watched like a dozen of those like knockout game videos, and like in every single one of them is like you can see where the instant that they picked who they were going to do it, and it's as transparent as day one because it's all a bunch of kids doing this shit, But there's other stuff where you start watching some of this stuff from Brazil or whatever, like you mentioned, and you have to watch the video a couple times because it's so precise and sudden,
intense,
and calculated, and it's right there, and you're like, you got to pause the video and go back to see who actually did the thing.
Yeah.
And that's been informing a lot of what I'm doing, because like, so I've hung out with people who are, according to them, like pretty, clued in. But to me, they're like transparently vigilant. I remember I was sitting in a restaurant, and this guy was a total stranger. He comes in, and he's got his sunglasses on the back of his head, and he sits down in the corner seat in the corner of the room so he can see the whole room, and his back's to a wall. And I'm like, I know everything about you immediately, dude. You didn't even look at me once.
Yeah.
And I saw you do all the sort of situational awareness things like a complete routine. And the one thing that you weren't aware of is how totally transparently you did all of that.
So so let me draw a parallel to that, right? Imagine the same situation in the land of convicts, in the house of wolves, right? And you're in prison, and if I'm trying to catch someone slipping, am I going to sit facing the door that they're going to walk through and just be like dialed in on them as soon as they walk through? No,
because then they know you're looking.
Yeah, like I'm fucking obvious. I'm obviously the dude that you need to worry about, right? Like, right. This very, very often when I go to places, you can often catch me with my back to the door, right? But here's the thing: I've been in more dangerous fucking situations than most anybody that would ever criticize me, right? And I still consider myself the most dangerous person in the room. So I don't give a fuck what direction I'm facing. The only gamble that you give up there is, all honesty, right? If your back is to the door, if a shooter comes in, you draw that unlucky straw being the first one to take a bullet, just for whatever fucking random reason, right? Outside of that, you have the element of surprise and concealment, because if something happens and you don't freak out, you know what I mean? Now you're in a really good position to move, because number one, I can draw my weapon and have it out, and you can't even see me because my back's to you. So there's just so many different elements of but this is a higher level of thinking. It's really a higher, and there are going to be people that would disagree, but these people have never operated at this level. So I don't care basically what they say, because I've operated at this level. I've done it at a life and death level. And I'm telling you, that's how it works. Like, the more, and it's like the guys in Brazil. If you watch enough of those Brazilian cop shooting surveillance videos, those guys will turn their back to the fucking robber, right? If it's not a direct hit on the cop. If a cop happens to be in there when there's a robbery, 9 times out of 10, they will turn their back on the robber, because they're concealing what they're about to do, and they're getting ready to make their move. Like they're blending.
I was just about to segue into how I think that there's a lot of focus on a fast draw if you start looking at more and more of these situations. There are some instances where there's like a fast draw really matters. I guess a few circumstances where
you should know how to do it.
Right. I mean, it sets up the foundation for the rest of it. right? Like
But it's not as useful as people think it is, though.
no, I think the surreptitious draw doesn't get enough credit or enough practice, and I don't think we necessarily get enough instruction in it, because I can think of situations that I've been in. One time was before I was old enough to get a permit, where I was a victim of a crime, and every time I look back on it, I'm like, this is a surreptitious draw opportunity here that would have prevented this. And there are other circumstances that I've been in where a surreptitious draw would have been appropriate. And the more of these circumstances that I examine, you know, like what we were talking about, where the person sort of like peels off from the crowd that's distracting the robber or the violent actor and surreptitiously draws their gun. I think there's a lot more to that. And like you were saying, in the middle of the fight, the draw needs to be surreptitious as well.
Yeah.
Because that increases the effectiveness of the ambush.
That should be a part of every good concealment class, like to teach that sometimes, most times, I would argue that the draw is going to be more useful that way than it is sub 1 second draw. The sub 1 second draw is very, very limited scope of usefulness, whereas that concealed draw, like you're talking about, is really what you're going to see utilized probably 80% of the time, or if not more.
For sure. I mean, I think a lot of people focus on the speed of it in order to overcome the complexity of being discreet about it. If you do it fast enough, you can do it. You know, the idea is that if you do it fast enough, you can do it right in someone's face. But I don't know. I remember the circumstance that I was in where there was a gun pointed at my face, and you definitely have like stutter steps of like perception and reperception and looking at the weapon and looking at the person, and you're trying to evaluate exactly what the right time and the right, you know, thing to do is in that instant. And maybe going directly to the gun isn't the way to do it. Maybe there's, you know, in terms of, we were talking about normalcy, right?
You have to find another way.
Right. And that person's expecting you to do certain things. They've picked you for this crime because of what they expect from you. And they're doing it the way they're doing it with a certain expectation of the results. And if you can play along with that into the ambush, you continually disadvantage and draw them into the counter ambush, deploy your countermeasures surreptitiously, and then proceed with the ambush, you're in a much better situation. So you do what they expect until
this is where
maximize your ambush.
That's exactly what I talk about when I talk about this concept of turn your counter ambush into an ambush. So the concealment and the sandbagging and you know, everything down to the concealment draw, the complexities of it being so well worked out that you are actually laying in wait for them to slip. You understand? So if you watch most robberies, if they don't come in and shoot you right away, almost every time there will be at least one golden opportunity. And you'll see it. They'll look away, they'll drop the gun. You know, they have this thing where they will do one hand down, one hand up for some reason. They got the gun here and they'll be like, gun goes down, finger goes up, pointing to tell you to do something. And it's a reaction, whereas it's like they can only have one fucking hand up at a time or something, you know, but you'll see it. The hand will go down and they'll point and you're like,
right. Or they use the gun to point.
Or they use, yeah, exactly. Or some form of that, right? Something happens or they look away and, you know, these are the opportunities you have to use their own actions to conceal what you're going to do. Like you don't, you know, I don't really ever want to be in a position where because how many times have you drawn your gun and got caught on your shirt or fucked your draw up?
Oh, all the time. And the faster you go, the more opportunities there
My
are.
biggest fear is that shit's going to happen that one fucking time I need do it super fast, right?
Right.
And I'm going to catch it on my shirt and be like, oh, fucking get shot, right? I don't want to do that. I would rather take my time and move in a way that I could, conceal that, or, and you've seen guys in some of the videos. There's one really good one where the guy steps around someone who's there.
Oh yeah, it's in a line at a bank or something, and he just like steps out of line, walks around someone, and comes out the other side and shoots the dude
with his gun out. Like it was like Superman. He went into the booth and came back out, right? Like it was fucking, that's how you do it. Like that's a professional.
And it's a slower time to draw.
It's more certain.
But to the person who you're drawing on, it appears more instantaneous, because one instant you are unarmed and compliant, and then in the next instant you have a gun in your hand. And their perception of that is much faster, because they're not watching you go through the motion of clearing it out and coming up and telegraphing all of that, because we're supposed to see things that move fast. The things that move fast stick out in our environment to us more than anything else. Like if I go like this, you're going to clue into me, especially when you're performing the robbery and expecting people to act a certain way, and you're looking for people to resist or to do something that doesn't fit the normalcy. So if I'm like, and I like move away, you're expecting me to flee from you. Yeah. And if I draw you into the defensive scenario,
that's why the retreat. So the trick is, and I understand this because I've done this exact same thing. The trick is to make the retreat move, right? Because you always get a retreat move where you turn away or you go behind something or someone else. It has to be almost like it can't stick out enough to make you a focus, right? You have to just kind of, and it's a really hard thing to do, because if you think about it, it's a life or death situation, and you're trying to do something counterintuitive. Like you're in it for the long haul, right? So to speak. Right. So when you go for this move to go around that person or go to put yourself in a position where you can draw in a more certain way, there's a very high amount of self-control at that moment, like where you have to really be like, okay, I got to be cool. I got to do this smoothly so as not to, attract a huge amount. Because if you freak out and you twist and run away and knock potato chips over and fuck shit up, like then you're a focal point. Right. So you have to like disappear, but you have to do this fast, and you have to drop off the radar and come back on real quick. Like it's got to be like that.
And the other major disadvantage is they've robbed or attacked a lot more people than you have, and they are much more used to they have a vocabulary of predictable reactions to expect. Right? Like they know how it goes, and they expect it to go a certain way, and they're looking for anomalies, because I'm sure they've seen some anomalies as well. So. This is where, short of going out and robbing a bunch of people, which is not something that I'm really interested in doing, it's hard to develop a vocabulary for that. And so fortunately, we've got friends who essentially manage databases of these videos. My favorite are the if they probably do, because he's a huge channel, but if anybody watching this doesn't know about active self-protection, they are a tremendous resource for these videos. I think every video that we've mentioned is on there, and it runs the full gamut of police encounters, attacks in foreign countries, like these like high crime, South American countries, stuff in the cities here in America, and just like, everything from like road rage confrontations to like hits on police in Colombia, and the amount of that is like, it's a gold mine that I think we haven't even begun to be able to tap. Like I would love to be able to actually glean data from some of that and see, what the average profile of reactions are, like whether or not it's a concealed draw, how many shots are fired, in what distance.
And that's the interesting stuff, because that's that's the stuff we need to know to validate this. Like, I mean, like I really rely on my experience to solidify a lot of the things that I teach. You know, is based on things I've done. I try not to get into talking about things in a strong way that I really haven't done myself and know what I'm talking about. So it's like I contacted John from ASP last week because I teach a particular type of retention shooting that I guess is not very common. And I've had a lot of guys come in and say, this is very different than what everyone else is teaching. And why is that? And I'm like, because this is how it's fucking done based on me having done it, you know, probably 8 times. I don't know, you know, so, and watching it have happened like a bunch of times. Right. So, so I hit John up and I said, hey, do you have some videos of people, you know, shooting from retention? And he's like, actually, that really doesn't exist in the thousands and thousands of videos that I've watched, right? Like, and I'm like, oh, okay.
That's
so
interesting.
You know, so then he's like, sends me a couple that kind of are, you know, not really shooting from retention, but kind of go one-handed, you know. And there's none, like there's none. And I talked to him, you know, that guy, there's nobody that's watched more videos of shootings than him.
Right.
I mean, he literally, hands down, is probably the king of knowing like what videos are out there of, you know, and there's no like retention shooting videos out there in the wild. And so, which validates my point, right? Like about all this other stuff. But
I think what might happen is that most of the people who are in that situation require a lot more space in that moment to feel confident in drawing their gun. So the amount of distance that they create between them and their attacker winds up being large enough that they don't need to go to the retention shot in those circumstances. You know, I think that's my suspicion. That
I mean, it could be, but the real point is that you might not get the opportunity to make that space, right?
Right.
So my point is that you know, with the data that's out there, and that was just a side note, I won't go into my retention thing here, but you know, the data that's out there is real. Like there's a couple of ways to get to experience, to learn from experience is what I meant to say. You can learn directly by doing it for real. And obviously you're not going to get the chance to get into gunfights very much. So you can learn by exposure, which is being there and seeing it happen to someone else. You can learn by proxy, which is what this is. You have somebody like me come in and tell you what it's like stabbing and shooting and things like that, have experienced it. Or you can learn through simulation, and that's where you do force on force and things like that. And the problem with simulation is that, you know, it's just like if you watch popular classes that do entangle fighting and stuff like that, there's a certain amount of artificiality that you can't get out of it, especially when you can't do striking and you can't do certain things. You know, you remove, if you remove any variables from the real world scenario, it's no longer a real world scenario. And I don't give a fuck how you cut it. If you have removed variables that could change the outcome, then you have changed the entire scenario.
Right, because, you know, no matter what, if I'm in that class, I know I'm in that class to have a fight. If I'm in the parking lot at Target, I don't know I'm in the parking lot at Target to have a fight.
First of all, yeah, and then also you can strike, you can do all these other things, and I know people are like, "Well, we're tired of hearing that," and I don't fucking care. I've been in a lot of fights, and I'm telling you that you know, gouging, stabbing, punching, kicking, striking, like all this stuff changes the outcome of fights. And if you take those things out of a fight, then you're reducing the things that could drastically change the outcome of the fight. And then if you go and watch videos of real fights and look at real data, which is the learning by exposure mode, you're going to see a very different thing. You're going to see people that, it doesn't look like a class, right? There's factors in there that are completely not acceptable to do in a class, right? Like if you get on top of me and you're going to mount me and start trying to do a ground and pound, and I just can't pull my knife out and start stabbing you in your rib cage. Now I could, but then I would never be allowed to wrestle with anybody anymore because I'd be in prison. So right. You just can't fucking throw those variables in there. But this is why. So if we could now shift over to talking about ROI and target selection and why these things matter so much, because if we start to get into minutia of like what's valid and what isn't, you get lost. Whereas if you're thinking about everything that we've talked about to this point about managing perceptions, concealing intentions, playing it like a chess game, positioning and planning ahead for position and baiting into position and dropping off the radar and coming back on in a better position, like all these things that we've already talked about. So the concept I use that differentiates the really dangerous guy from the not so dangerous guy is the return on investment calculation, right? The really high order guy is not going to risk a large amount of loss in terms of going to prison or anything like that, maybe loss of life on a target that is not going to be really worth it, right? So the guy who goes in to steal a 12-pack of beer and ends up stabbing the clerk when the clerk tries to stop him, that's still an absolutely dangerous guy, but his ROI calculation is not exactly what we would call a very good one, right? Like,
right.
He risked everything and probably goes to prison over a 12-pack of fucking beer, which is, and probably cheap beer at that.
Right. It's not rational.
No, it's not. So, but now if you are like the class we were in together, like you were in my class in DC, and we had somebody in the class that was running a mission rescuing teens in Asia, where the Asian mafia was wherein Asian mafia was operating a human trafficking operation.
Right.
Now that guy's ROI is fucking huge, right?
They gotta retain their assets.
Yeah. So if he is removing assets from them and hurting their revenue stream by rescuing kids and keeping them from the trafficking ring, then he becomes a target that's worth the juice is worth the squeeze. Yep. Right. So he can attract a much higher order criminal, a much more capable, and those are the guys you see roll up on 3 motorbikes, fucking smoke your shit and roll off, and it's done in 30 seconds.
You attract someone who gets sent there because they are absolutely capable of doing that job in a planned and precise way, not just some guy who's like trying to get a few wallets tonight.
Yeah. So that's the difference. So the difference in the high order and low order typically is going to be in the ROI calculation. It's what they're in. And the honest truth is that most people, you just don't live a life that puts you very high on the scale of return on investment for a high order guy. Like you have to be ready to face a super violent criminal. Like I would not put Mike Tyson as a high order person, but you put him under the direction of a high order criminal and you've got a super dangerous motherfucker now. Do you understand?
Right.
Because if you look at Tyson when he was younger, he was an animal. He was absolutely a criminal. And the only thing that kept that guy straight was the boxing gym. It very easily could have been a crime boss that picked him up.
Right, for sure.
And then that crime boss could make the determination and send that guy in. But, so either way, you run into him somewhere, it's going to be a bad day. But the determination between ROI is always going to be what puts you on the scale of being a target for really dedicated people or a target for randomness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I think that there's a relationship between that and the interaction between delayed gratification and IQ levels. I think there's probably something in there where you ever hear about the marshmallow test that they did with kids? It's like it was just some little like developmental psychology test where they put a kid in a room with a marshmallow and they say, if you don't eat this in 10 minutes, you could get a second one. And it's like it's some incredibly small number of kids actually like sat on their hands and waited the 10 minutes to get a second marshmallow, and then that wound up being a substantial predictor of long-term lifetime success. And I think that what we talk about when we talk about ROI is
time preference.
Right, time preference, delayed gratification, the ability to plan and observe consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you an indicator that criminals aren't just all dumb, disadvantaged people who can't control the degree of violence that they apply to the world. I mean, there's some of that. And like sometimes I'll watch I'll like get into like watching a marathon of prison shows, and you start to see how the people in that population break down. Some of them are people who have like you wonder why we're putting people with like such obvious developmental problems in a cage. And then other people are like actually smart and dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's just like the rest of us, I think we underestimate the degree to which someone could be reserved and calculating and actually dangerous. And I think that's why we portray them in fiction a lot, because it's, you know, it's compelling and interesting when in fact it's probably a lot more common than we think.
It is. And somebody like me who's been around a very high concentration of the most dangerous people out there, you know, I spent years day in and day out with the most dangerous people out there, you know, and I'm looking at it from that paradigm, whereas the average person may have probably has never encountered a super dangerous person in their life. So to them, it's a very uncommon thing. And to me, I'm thinking, I actually personally know probably a couple hundred people that, you know, just in this state, like, and that was just from one place, you know? So to me, it's a very real and apparent thing, but to the average person, because their experience differs, they don't know. But I can promise you that they're very real. They're out there. They're plentiful, and there's a lot more. I knew lifelong criminals that never got caught. You know, my uncles were extremely dangerous people. Now, they all ended up dying, right? Now, I had an uncle that was murdered, and another one that I found OD'd. You know, my best friend was murdered. You know, that's a consequence, right? But they never got caught, and like they didn't die in prison, right? Like, but they were extremely dangerous people. And there's a lot of people out there that get away with a lot of stuff. There's, you know, in some areas, some concentrated areas where the murder rate is really high, you know, there's a upwards of 80+% unsolved murder rate.
Oh yeah, I know here in Philly, it's I think last time I checked, it was at least 60%.
60% unsolved murders. Like, think about, like, the implication of that is that somebody killed somebody and never fucking got caught.
And that's occurring in an environment in which most of the murders are occurring in a specific geographic area among people who already know each other. Look at how many variables, like look at how small that makes the list of potential perpetrators, and they're still not captured. Right? Mm-hmm. Like you've defined the pool of potential perpetrators so narrowly based on location and acquaintance, because most of this is acquaintance.
Yeah.
Anyway, and they're still not getting caught. Right? think about how many of those dudes are just lucky, and then and then you got to recognize that some of them are more than lucky.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just luck. It's not just understaffing of investigatory units or enforcement.
They plan not to leave any shell cases. They plan not to leave any fingerprints. They plan to not get caught. Like that's their intention, you know?
Right. I mean, they're out there. I mean, I've never done anything as consequential as a murder. I've never planned anything like that. I can't imagine what it's like to actually get it together and do it several times without being caught. Like that's, I mean, and they're out there.
After the first time, it would just become, you know, like I have people that I would call associates that have done that, you know. And these are people that I, you know, slept in the same place with, played cards, had breakfast, lunch, dinner, worked out, maybe, you know, like lived daily life with, you know. And so the conversations I had over, you know, 5 years of time was intense, you know. And you have to think about, if you want to understand the criminal mind, there's such a large spectrum. You know, and I'll spare you the details of like some of the horrible shit I heard, but you know, everything from horrible mistreatment as kids, you know, and you know, all the way to, you know, extreme violence. Like I grew up in extreme violence and you know, was nearly a stabbing victim in my house when I was 6, you know, and watched my family, you know, go through things like that. And multiple people got killed throughout, you know, growing up. And, you know, there were times when I was at the place where the body was, or where the person was killed. When you reach a point like that, and the way you look at the world starts to change, your value system changes, your fear scale changes drastically, what you're certain and uncertain about change drastically. And you know, the way that I teach fighting in general is that uncertainty is really the enemy. Like when you come to violence of mind, you know, by the end of the class, that's really what we're talking about. I nail it all together and I say, here's what we're trying to do is eliminate uncertainty. And that's really the concept, right? So the way we do that is by orientation and conditioning. We build the conditioning and build the orientation, which is the foundation of mindset. And understanding all of this, we understand that there's a mirror of this for the criminal too, because I'm trying to reverse engineer how our mindset was built on this side of the tracks, and then come over to here and say, this is how this happens over there. So here's ways that you can mimic this to a certain extent and start to understand it, and then start to become self-aware enough to create that in yourself. So when you ask questions just like that, and you say, here's someone who's done multiple murders and they're planning stuff, and I can't imagine that. You have to get away from that paradigm where you're saying, I will never understand that mindset, and start getting to a perspective where you're saying, I understand that, and I will not approach that with uncertainty. Does that make sense where I'm going with that?
Absolutely. I was actually just having a conversation with someone the other day about this sort of rapid succession of mass shootings, and they think, well, I have no idea how anyone could do that. And I think, and my point was that the unwillingness to recognize the own shadow that you carry around with you sort of shuts off your imagination. So if you're I think it was Nietzsche who said that the line between good and evil runs down the middle of everyone's heart, or something to that effect, where there's just as much evil in there if you're willing to examine it and recognize it. And people like to consider themselves as good people, and they put that away, and they don't recognize the sort of like lingering human darkness. And when they don't see it in themselves, they don't see it when it's growing in someone else.
No.
So they go, oh man, I had no idea. I didn't know he was capable of that. I don't know where it came from. I can't imagine how someone could do that. Well, if you're aware of it in yourself to whatever degree it exists, because obviously it doesn't, not everyone is equally as evil. It's going to come in a range the way every other trait does, I'm sure. But if you can see that it's there, you can see it in other people and see the degree to which they're possessed by it. You know, you can see the second shadow that they cast if you can see yours. You know, and I think that's part of the larger problem that we have as a culture, the fact that we shut that out in ourselves and then don't see it in other people, and then don't reach out to them when they're clearly carrying that weight around. But that also makes it, when you're confronted by it in someone else, when they're attacking you, you know, then you're completely shocked by it, and you don't have any way to access it in yourself in order to deploy it. So I think it's worth some like real serious examination, and that's something that I've been doing a lot more of since I took your class. I also think that's probably a pretty good place to start wrapping this up and encouraging people to find his class wherever you can take it and go to it. Because if I had a lot of this stuff kind of like scattered in my mind, like a fragmented hard drive, and I had like bits and pieces of experience and bits and pieces of perception and bits and pieces of personal practice, and they all kind of made sense a little bit in isolation. But when I took this class, it aligned them in a serious way, in a way that's it's really tough to teach mindset. And I see a lot of people give you bits and pieces, or give you components of mindset, or give you something that you can take and use towards developing a mindset. But if you are looking for something that is like coherent and comprehensive and will square your shit away in terms of mindset, I absolutely recommend Varg's classes. And I'm looking forward to taking another one as soon as I can. And I want to thank you for coming on. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to. So I teach at the Alliance Police Facility. I've got probably half a dozen classes at least on the schedule for 2018. The registration has not opened for those yet, but it's on my website, onelifedefense.com. So if you go to my website, you'll see that schedule. I've got my own range that I'll be doing classes at next year too. For the violence of mind stuff that you're referencing, I will travel to do that. I won't travel to do firearms because logistically I just made a decision I'm not going to do that. But I will travel for the mindset courses. So if somebody's interested in hosting me, I think I'm going to be in Florida. Right now I'm looking at Florida, Michigan, Texas, and possibly come back to Virginia. So it just depends. I'll probably be back in West Virginia again. So anybody that's interested in hosting that, that's a real easy deal. We just need a classroom. We can get it set up. But other than that, my YouTube channel's got quite a few little videos on it about some of the topics that I like to push. So you can check me out there, Patreon, wherever you want to catch me at.
Yeah, for sure. And you can look up a whole bunch of older primary and secondary modcasts, which feature Varg if you want to voraciously consume this material, which I recommend that you do.
That's all listed on my YouTube channel under other appearances, like all that. This will go there. All that stuff is in there too.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure to put all the links in the description for the One Life Defense website.
Cool.
Fantastic, man.
Very cool.
Fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on and spending your afternoon, man. That was excellent.
No problem.
Hopefully people dig this video and get a flavor of like what they're missing out on, and like how much they need to actually be orienting themselves to this.
Yeah, it's a different perspective.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks,
Very
man. Cool, man. Thank you.